Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for stopping by again. If you got a notification before this one of a video up and then came and found nothing, or a private video or one thing or another, my apologies for that. That's a involved story with it, but not important. Actually, though, what has been going on has also affected me and how I've been able to make my presentations here. I've been feeling out of sorts for a couple weeks. Run down, really tired, and so forth. And no, isn't COVID, so that's always a plus. And I felt like I've been there, I've done this before, this has happened before, but I'm not sure if it's true or not, and so on. And I wasn't sure who to go to or what tests to get, etc. So I was sort of working my way through this, and I'm not well centered over the last couple of weeks, last week particularly. I'm just not centered, and I don't like being that way. So I was that way when I was doing this other video. I did it in parts, and I put them together, and it just, anyhow, I thought I had done a pretty decent job of it, and I put it up, and made a mistake, which is the exact opposite of what I normally do. I normally watch it up there on YouTube when it's private, just for me, and be sure that I want it like it is and I haven't forgotten something or whatever, and then I post it. Well, I didn't do it this time. This time I posted it. I thought it was ready. I was sick and tired of doing it, pieces of it over again. And I took, went in to look at it. I said, yeah, I do not like this. It's not going out. And yes, now I see, this is not good. And the whole thing is going to be a mess. So I canceled it as quickly as I could, but the notification would have gotten out to you. So this is the replacement for it. I am also happy to say that as of this morning, it became clear what the problem was. It's just an infection. I know who to go to. I know the test to get. I've been working on that today. And just knowing that that's not a major problem, and I know I don't have COVID or anything, nothing life-dealing, then I can now at least have a little bit more cheerful attitude as we get take care of it. And that's why. So be it. Now, there are things I wanted to discuss anyhow, and I'm going to get them all in today. First off, a lot of people who do come here are interested in surfing, and that's all age groups. I mean, it comes in all types of people who are interested, and others just enjoy watching it and seeing it and being involved around it and so on. Well, the government has gone around the country, basically, and they've found certain areas that they're going to target for types of tourist development and things of this sort. And one of the areas that has been targeted is Panamá, which is, let me bring up a map here. Hold on a sec. Okay. Now, if you look down, to begin with, you can see Panama City sort of in the middle there with a star. Now, down to the lower left, that box, that blue box, is what's called the Azuero Peninsula. And you will hear the Azuero, and they mention it frequently, but it doesn't always show up on a map, because it's not a province or something. It's just that piece of earth there at Panama that sticks out into the Pacific Ocean. That's exactly what it is. So that's the Azuero. And the circle, the red circle, in the center of that pretty much is Panamá, developed Panamá, and Playa Venao. So just to give you an idea, when I say it's going to be in Panamá and Playa Venao and the Azuero, you have an idea of where that is. Now, the reason I bring this up is that I know some of you are interested in surfing. If you are here in August, you may have the opportunity to see it competitively. The Pan American Surfing Association will hold its 2022 surfing games here in Panama, in this very beach, Playa Venao, and Panamá. That's from August 7th to August 13th. This is not the first time we've done this. This has been done before. It was very successful. It hasn't happened for a couple of years because of the pandemic. Now it's being done. The surfers will be coming from all over Latin America, very likely up from the U.S. as well, I would assume. And it would be very interesting to see. It's a great competition. People really love it. People really turn out for it. Next year, I think it's Chile will be host of it, and so on. So we're it this year. And if you're interested, so I will leave a a link in the description below that will give you a little bit more information about it and serve as a beginning point for making plans if that's what you are interested in doing. From my perspective, the key thing is that the government has a very active plan here that involves construction of a sports center, a whole variety of things to boost that area. That was created before the pandemic. Now that's on hold for the moment, and instead what they're doing is about $25 million, which is a pretty good piece of money down in that area of the world. They're improving roads, they're upgrading the airport. All of this stuff is there, it just needs improvement, it needs upgrading. They're taking care of that. And the reason being very simply, that's half a dozen different activities underway, and it's going to employ a lot of people. The larger efforts, the sports center or whatever that they expect to create there, I mean, that has to go through the design process and the preparing specifications and getting things, the paperwork out for bidding and on and on and on. So that won't provide much in the way of labor during this period. And that's what we're really focused on here. So I think the government's doing the right thing by focusing on this and making it as pleasant as possible for the people coming in August. And then next time around, we'll have something even perhaps a little bit more impressive for them and anybody else who's interested. This is going to happen in several different places in the country as the Tourism Authority and the various agencies involved and businesses and so forth choose where they want to focus their efforts. But this is one of those that's already established and set up. Okay. Now I'd like to talk a little bit more about selecting your place to live and answer one question here that came from a gentleman, Don, who wrote and said, what about the Atlantic? And I thought, oh, you mean the Atlantic coast, of course. We call it the Caribbean when we want to sell you something, and we call it the Atlantic the rest of the time. That's how I like to put it. But there's very little on the Atlantic coast. Bocas del Toro is that area, which has really got a fairly significant number of expats who live there and have turned it into a place where people visit, tourists, and so forth on that coast. But otherwise, there's not a great deal of that. Now, much of the coastal area is part of comarcas that are set aside for indigenous people. Those areas cannot be sold. They're to remain as they are, and they are run corporately by the tribal group that lives there. So forget buying anything there. There's not anything for sale. So you have to find, there are some areas on the Atlantic coast that aren't little comarcas. They are places where people go for tourist activity occasionally. There's Isla Grande, which is an island, which is a very nice place. People go up for a weekend or whatever. And there's the Portobello. It's a fort from hundreds of years ago. I mean, back in the early days of the Spanish. It's got it so. It's just an interesting location. If you're into that, people very frequently stop by and see that. There's some churches here. There's this and that. There's not a great deal up there, and there's very little in the way of developments or even hotels, for that matter. And it just really boils down to the fact that Panama is a Pacific country, has been from the beginning. This has been the center of activity. That's where the people were, where the business were, where the troops were. Because, in the early days, the most exposed part of Panama was to the Pacific, and they were bringing the gold and silver up from Peru. And they had to worry about other nations. They had to worry about pirates and whatever. But on the Caribbean side, that was almost a Spanish sea after a fashion. I mean, there was a lot more of their activity going on over there. They had a lot more military based on that side. So it was a little more secure. So they really had to focus a lot on Panama City, which is the oldest city, the European-style city, on the Pacific coast of the Americas, from Alaska to Argentina. So, as it is, we have a problem in the sense that we don't really have a lot of experience in that area. It has never been a tourist area for Panama. Never been all that interesting. Colón, the other end of the canal, has been sort of the port area. It's a port city. It's had its good days, its not so good days, but it's not the same as Panama City. It hasn't been treated that way at all, I can assure you. And we are forever trying to make up for neglect in past years. But the simple fact of the matter is that we have no real activity. And so it is that people do not go up and buy except once in a while. And that's what I wanted to talk about. A gentleman wrote me a few years ago, and he had a home, an absolutely beautiful home. Just right there on the coast, raised above the beach, which you had to step down to, which is a nice thing from a rising sea perspective. And a beautiful lawn, and a beautiful large lot, a beautiful home. There's nothing you can complain about. And this side of the country, it would have sold for, in those days, particularly for a lot of money. I don't remember what he wanted. He was maybe $450,000, $500,000. I mean, he was asking for a lot, but not when you saw what he had. That is from the perspective of housing in general, and from Panama, the Pacific Coast. Quite realistic. Unfortunately, it was totally unrealistic for him. And he wrote me, he said, Bob, he'd been a member for retirement way for a long time. He said, I can't even find an agent that will put my property up in the web. They won't accept it. He was just shocked. I wasn't. Because this was not, when he had bought before, it was probably a little bit more in the area of when we had the seller's market, so to speak. We had so many people pouring into town, but it doesn't make any difference. The point is that this is a period a little later when things had quieted down from the big burst in the first decade of this century. And quite frankly, nobody thinks in terms of it. Nobody pushes it. How many of you have heard about the Caribbean side of things, other than perhaps Bocas del Toro, which is way up in one corner of the country? The rest of it you probably heard very little about. The hotels that have been set up there and developments, housing developments, have not been at all successful. The result is that he was sitting there, and for the agents, this is a key thing to keep in mind for resale, for perspective. The agents are as focused and concentrated in that red box, that Caja de Panama, I call it, that I've shown you, that includes the city and the beaches west of the city. That's where they are. That's where the business is. They're very, very, very focused on that. Now, they exist in other places now because of activity is significant enough to draw them to places like David and Boquete and in whole Los Santos area and so on. So they're showing up elsewhere, but not a lot of them, but they're there for sure. In the East, very, very, very few. Pardon me, the East. Up in the Caribbean, very, very, very few. So it meant that if he found an agent who put it up there, number one, very doubtful they were going to get anybody who was interested in the Caribbean. But if they did, this person came in, they come into Tocumen, they stay in hotels here, they see all the various property developments going on and all the activity here. Then the agent would have to take them up. It would be basically all the way up there. It takes time. It's not, it's not a 20-minute drive. It's to get to that place was longer. And they would look around the house, and you'd probably end up almost certainly eating lunch there and then turning and coming back. Fundamentally, a wasted day from the perspective of the agent, because the odds and the agents had of this person wanting this specific property at this specific price and doesn't want to look at 100 different properties, some of which will be equally nice and some even cheaper on the Pacific Coast, is not worth my effort. And I'm just wasting my time. I've got to use that day. I can talk to 3 or 4 clients in that day here on the Pacific Coast. And so, and I don't blame them entirely. It is tough. I mean, you end up being a tour guide, instead of a real estate agent, and it's not what you're hired to do. So it gets complicated. And I say that to folks when I say, always keep in mind that, as I've told you before, I don't care what your purpose is in coming to live here. if you ever intend to go back to wherever your home nation is, or it might be as a result of your health service that you need, or the death of a spouse, I mean, who knows what, okay? But if you were to expect it at some point to go back, at that point you would sell your property, no doubt, unless you had somebody who really wanted to have it, of course, but most people don't. So they have to sell it. And it might be or might not be a good market to do it in. So you need to keep in mind, especially amongst those who are older, but you can die at any age. I'm sorry, I'm just being blunt here. But you got to keep this sort of stuff in mind when you don't have family here of your own, and you don't have anybody really in place to take care of it. And if something happens, no matter what your age is, something happens to you suddenly, and decisions have to be made, and spouses or significant others or whatever have to be involved in everything else, it gets complicated very quickly, and I hear about it because they contact me. So I know what they go through. It's not pretty. So in his particular case, had he been here earlier, I wouldn't have discouraged him from buying. It was a beautiful place, but I'd say you've got to keep in mind, once you're up here, that it's going to be very difficult to find a buyer when you're ready to sell it, unless there's a lot of development in this area. There wasn't, but they were talking a lot about it at the time. So his idea was, down the road, there's going to be a lot of development here, because I've read this and this and that and this. Well, I knew what he was reading. I was reading it too. And it was a lot of excitement among certain elements in the community that were running around buying up land in that area as cheaply as they could, because, well, they thought this was going to be a booming area, and they're wrong. And I can give you 6 reasons, 8 reasons, 10, why it's not likely to ever happen that way on the Caribbean coast. But for that period of time, it seemed as if that was very possible. And it didn't happen, and it hasn't happened since then, as years have passed by. So it's a tough sort of decision to make. It's something you really have to be somewhat cautious in and somewhat aware of. Above all, I don't care who you are, what your age is, or anything else, you have to have it clear what happens in the event you're not here. And yeah, I mean, you don't have to die for this to happen. You just have to go back somewhere, or have to go off somewhere for a couple of years. Who do you know? What's going to take care of the property? Who's going to look at it, or who's going to put it on the market and actively sell it and maintain it so it's showable? And all these little details. I talk to people and I say, when you sit down and you think about things like wills and what have you, keep these things in mind too, because they're very practical. And it doesn't mean you have to go where everybody else is, not at all. It's just you need to be sure you know what it is you're doing, and where you're doing it, and why you're doing it there, and you're thinking in terms of what you might do in a bad situation, so you're ready. So that's my answer to Don, so to speak. It's the best I can give you right at the moment. But one of the things that's most frequently requested here, which cannot always be found here, is high-speed internet access. Now, in the city, we have no problem at all. I get 400 down. That's faster than many of my friends up in the U.S. But anyhow, in the urban areas, you get it, and you'll get it in some rural areas fairly well. But there's a lot of areas where it is expensive to get it, and you don't get it very fast, and it's not dependable, and so on and so on and so on. So, and it is today, as a matter of fact, that the news went out the last couple of days that the government has had meetings with Starlink, SpaceX fame, Starlink, and we will have an effort made down here. There's going to be some sort of cooperative effort. I have not seen the official press release, so I don't know the details. But apparently there's going to be a partnership here as we find, hopefully, effective and innovative ways to use that Starlink system to bring all of Panama up onto a high-speed internet service. And I think it's a wonderful idea. Obviously, it's going to take time to unfold, and we need to know more about it and so forth, what have you. But the government is already committed to providing Wi-Fi in spots, I don't know, 100 or more of them around the country. Very expensive, very difficult, service is still slow, a lot of maintenance problems, blah, blah, blah. If we can get something that's high speed and one system that we can sort of doesn't solve all the problems in terms of maintenance, but at least much of them are centered in one location. Everything else, it could be a big step forward. So I'll hope that's the case, and we'll see what happens, and I'll let you know as that develops, or when it gets to a point where it really directly affects you. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with a link down below, because one of the concerns people have is speaking Spanish and getting around and learning the language and everything else. And it's very frustrating for those who just aren't set up for that. I mean, this is really something that you're born with, and they have the ease of learning languages or have difficulty learning them. It's not something you have to sit around and be ashamed of. You're definitely not alone if you're one of those who has trouble. But Google has an idea for you if you haven't heard about it or seen it yet. I'll put a link down to it, their presentation of it. What the next step in translation to be used in conversations between normal people. And I think it's a wonderful idea. I like to see that they have a prototype that actually works and makes sense. And I hope they can have it in a couple of years in a form that we can use, and then eventually in a form that we can also afford. But the point is that we're making progress, and I wanted to share that with you too, so that you have an idea of what may be coming down the road at some point when you're living right here. So thanks again for stopping by, and I'll try not to have to stop propagation of a video in quite the same way as I did earlier. My apologies for that again.